Hello and welcome, fellow lifelong learners. Thanks for joining me for One More Thing, a radio show all about cultivating our most valuable asset, our mind, and fostering a sense of curiosity to learn one more thing. We feature passionate practitioners and seasoned experts in numerous areas of interest for lifelong learners of all ages. One More Thing is sponsored by Kiffin & Company, a corporate learning and talent development consulting firm, and I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert, a certified professional in talent development, learning advocate, and your fellow lifelong learner. Welcome to the show. My earliest memory of seeing a snake up close was when a family member did a sort of show and tell of the snakes he had found in the wilderness near where our family was staying. Don't worry though, it was a catch, teach, and release situation, and because of his profession involving the study of nature's creatures, he was able to safely catch them, tell us stories about the different kinds, and then also safely release them back into their own habitat. It was fascinating. To this day, I am still more startled by snakes than scared of them, and I think that has a lot to do with my family's exposure to them in a non-threatening way. Despite having brothers, by the way. If you or someone you know is completely freaked out by snakes, frogs, lizards, salamanders, and so on, today's show might just give them a new perspective. My guests today are nature-loving experts in their fields who are going to share how the similarities and differences in paths coming out of shared interest can lead to a lifetime of unique experiences and maybe spark a different view about a variety of species. I will be right back to introduce you to both of them right after this.
Maximize impact with tailored solutions by partnering with Kiffin & Company. Developing your team is an investment, but it doesn't have to be just an expense. Discover more at kiffinandcompany.com and start your journey to effective learning today.
Welcome back. Let me introduce you to Whit Gibbons and Parker Gibbons. Whit Gibbons is an internationally renowned herpetologist and is Professor Emeritus of Ecology at the University of Georgia and Savannah River Ecology Library. He has written 25 books and more than 250 scientific publications on conservation and the environment with a focus on reptiles and amphibians. Whit has had environmental commentaries on National Public Radio, written more than 1,000 popular articles published in magazines and newspapers, and continues to write a weekly column, environmental column, Ecoviews. Initially, it was distributed by the New York Times regional newspaper group. He wrote the Merit Badge booklet, Reptile and Amphibian Study for the Boy Scouts of America in 1993. There is so much more, but in the interest of time, I will just say that you can find his complete biography on the Smithsonian Herpetological Information Service, number 156. And don't worry about knowing what that means because there's a link to it on his website, whitgibbons.com. Also with us is Parker Gibbons, and he is a 21-year-old naturalist and photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. He works as a guide for Barrier Island Eco Tours, leading tours of the tidal salt marsh and all the creatures that it beholds. Parker volunteers with the Turtle Survival Alliance and the Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy, helping to educate the public on reptiles and amphibians, as well as assisting in the in-field research. He has spent time working on research projects for turtles in Belize and crocodiles in the Dominican Republic. That is a lot for these two, and there's so much more. Let's start with some basics for those who may not be familiar with your areas of interest. Will y'all share what herpetology is and what it means to be a herpetologist? And then Parker, the same for you being a naturalist?
Sure. Well, herpetology is pretty straightforward. It's the study of reptiles and amphibians. And reptiles are, of course, crocodilians, alligators, turtles, snakes, lizards. And amphibians that we're familiar with are the salamanders and frogs and toads.
And so what does it mean to actually be a herpetologist? Obviously, the study of those, but what does it look like?
Well, there are different ways to study. One is you can do research and publish them in scientific publications or write books. Another is to teach herpetology to people. And I think that's what Parker does a lot of now, and I've certainly did a lot of myself, talking to groups, taking people on field trips. And it's with this group of animals, most people pay attention.
So really with herpetology, it's really a lot of field research and then writing up the findings from your research.
Yeah, the kind of work I think both of us do is field research. In other words, working with the animals out in nature. And there are some herpetologists that do laboratory work, genetics, for instance, and other physiological studies. But most of what we have done has been behavioral research out in the field, or ecological research out in the field.
Got it. Thank you. So Parker, then with you, with being a naturalist, what's the difference? What does that mean, and what does it look like in your day to day?
Well, being a naturalist is pretty much interpreting the natural world and sharing that to people. Environmental education is super important. People aren't going to want to protect something unless they know about it. So you get people interested, you share your love of the natural world, and that's what being a naturalist is.
And so it seems like one of the things with you, Parker, is that you really love sharing your love of nature and educating others. I heard that you had I believe it was a Facebook group, Parker Teaches Science, I think is what it's called. Gosh, how old were you when you started that?
That was COVID. So that was during the pandemic. And I just figured, people aren't going to school, kids aren't learning what they normally would be learning. So I'm going to do these live streams once a week where I just bring some animals on, talk about it. And it got a pretty big following. And yeah, it was just all about sharing my love of reptiles and amphibians and all other natural things.
So I didn't say at the beginning, but Parker is the grandson of Whit. And so I would think, Parker, that means that you started gaining some experience with nature and with animals pretty much from birth. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. Like growing up and going out on research projects definitely made a big impact on who I am today.
And your world, your profession right now is giving those ecological tours, so very experiential. And then with your tenured career in academia, I know folks can probably gather what academia, in the university world a little bit, but can we go back and talk about how did you didn't have a grandfather that was a renowned herpetologist. So how did you get into it?
Well, I had an aunt, one of my dad's sisters, Aunt Hattie, who was working on a master's degree in biology, and she had to go on field trips, and she took me along. I was teenager at the time, maybe 12 years old to start with. And so I got a lot of experience. And I think my whole career has just been a series of serendipitous situations. I just, when I was young, I had a family that was tolerant of my bringing home snakes and turtles and frogs. And then in going to college, I had teachers that were mentors that sort of just encouraged me to keep doing what I wanted to do. And then I went to first job was with the University of Georgia at the Savannah River Ecology Laboratory, and was able to continue just working with reptiles and amphibians out in the field and turning that into a career. It was kind of easy because that's what I wanted to do.
Well, this show is all about lifelong learning. And so one of the things that I thought was so interesting about the idea of having y'all on the show is to teach people, or to share with people about the natural world, but with obviously specifically more reptiles and amphibians, thinking about regionally here in the United States. Are there particular regions that are known for certain things? And even if you want to go so far as to what are some safety precautions or things to look at, I know there may be a plethora of things, but what are some highlights for folks?
Well, I think the Southeast, as you say, that's the hotbed of reptiles and amphibians, particularly amphibians. There are more salamanders in the Southeast than in most other parts of the world. Out west, of course, you have more reptiles, particularly lizards. For instance, some of the western states have a lot more lizards than we have in the Southeast. Turtles, there are more turtles in the Southeast than any other place other than China, maybe, or the Southeast Asia. So we've got an incredible biodiversity in the Southeast. And I think both Parker and I have just taken advantage of that by working with these animals and showing them the people. And in fact, I had many students, a number of graduate students at the University of Georgia, but Parker was my youngest student, starting when he was about 3 years old, catching a bullfrog. And he was an easy audience. We did a number of things, starting in my backyard, where we would set out boards and look under them, find little snakes and salamanders and whatever we could find. But I think some people have just an innate curiosity. Other people, and I think Parker certainly fit in that category, and I for some reason I did too. I just liked working with these animals and finding them and watching them. A lot of people aren't familiar with them. And what I think they need to do is have somebody show them. And it's amazing. I'm sure Parker's had the same experience with a lot of the eco tours he's on, where people didn't realize they were so fascinated by what they find, what somebody else shows them. And then they become advocates for protecting these animals and protecting nature.
Yeah, I think that when you start to learn about something, and this could be, I mean, truly almost in reference to anything, but as you learn more about it, you fear it less. And I get that, the idea of the wanting to protect it. So Parker, with these tours that you're leading, what do those look like? What are you actually touring? What are you showing people? What are they learning?
Yeah, so we do public trips, and then we also do field trips for schools. We see about 10,000 kids every year. We take them out on the tidal salt marsh. We go through, talk about island geology. We talk about dolphins, pretty much anything we see that is of interest, we talk about it. We talk about oysters, and then we get to a barrier island. It's an undeveloped barrier island called Capers Island, and we go explore the island. It has a beautiful boneyard beach. That's where the trees have been left away and then the island moved backwards. And so the whole front beach is covered with dead trees. So we just take these kids out and take them to explore it. A lot of these kids are coming from schools that are lower income. They're farther inland. So these are kids who've never been on a boat before. There's kids who've never been on a beach before, and we're just giving them that experience.
For listeners who might not have any clue as to some of the words that you just used, will you explain? So when you say tidal salt marsh, so tidal as in TIDAL, water tides, what is a tidal salt marsh?
Yeah, so those three words, tidal, salt, marsh, describe it to a T. So it's tidal, twice a day that tide rises and falls. Here it's about a 6 foot change every 6 hours. That second word, salt, it is pure salt water in a lot of the places where there's not any freshwater rivers coming out. That is pure ocean water coming from the ocean. And then marsh is the Spartina grass, which kind of holds the whole ecosystem together. It's erosion control.
Awesome. And I think we did say that you're in Charleston, so people can understand that's the Charleston, East Coast, South Carolina. And then you mentioned that you take them out to an undeveloped barrier island. So explain what a barrier island is.
South Carolina has 34 barrier islands, and a barrier island has a front sandy beach and then mud and marsh in the back. And these barrier islands take the brunt of the force from storms like hurricanes, and they protect the mainland.
That's really cool that those kids get to experience that. I mean, actually, it sounds like something I would like to come over and do myself. So I'm going to keep that on my list.
Absolutely.
Well, you were talking about sharing with, especially these kids, but sharing with people about the animals and sharing your love to reduce fear and increase compassion. I'm going to use that word. Hopefully that fits. But that was one of my questions I was going to ask is for both of you, how do you react or how do you talk with people who are fearful of animals? I mean, most people are not fearful of frogs, although I've heard a few squeals when a frog has come into view for someone. But I definitely have heard squeals when a snake or even a salamander or something, when people see it and they're like automatically that fear kicks in. How do you talk with them about that?
Well, I'm sure Parker's got answers too, but I can say, and I'm sure he would agree with this, the group of animals people fear most are snakes. And of course, there's some background to that because there are, even on that island, there are cottonmouths on that island, and a lot of the barrier islands have rattlesnakes and copperheads, which are venomous. And so we try to teach people not to fear these animals, but to appreciate them and when we take people on field trips who haven't aren't familiar with these animals already. For instance, with snakes, we ask people not to pick up a snake or not to get close to it. None of them are going to chase you, despite what some people think in their mind, but they don't. None of our snakes chase anybody, and you can watch them from several feet away, any snake, and it doesn't want to stay there with you anyway. So you're lucky if you get to see it and it stays put. Turtles aren't such a problem. Most people kind of like turtles, though some of them can bite. Frogs, yes, I have run into a few people that for some reason are terrified of frogs. Salamanders, I think, are a great group of animals because people don't know much about them, but these are fascinating creatures. I mean, very colorful, yellow, green, red, orange, silver, black and silver. It's easy to get somebody interested in these animals, and we don't, and Parker and neither one ever try to scare anybody with a snake, for instance. And you just sometimes, you can't force people, but sometimes when people get more familiar, the more familiar they get, the more comfortable they become with them. What do you think, Parker?
Yeah, well, I think the hardest person to convince that snakes aren't bad is an adult who is terrified of snakes. The amount of times I've walked into an education program and a bunch of kids are terrified, by the end of the program, they're wanting to hold the snake. They're wanting to touch the snake. It's hard to do that with somebody who's spent their whole life scared of that, but a kid is the easiest person to convince to love these animals.
I've got a couple of examples about that. I was giving a talk of Parker and I both love to give talks to groups of people. And then I was talking to a neighborhood group, 20 or 30 people, families and their kids. And I was showing them salamander and everybody was interested in a turtle. And then I got out the first snake and nearly all the adults backed away and all the kids came forward. Starting with kids seem to have, they're not afraid of snakes. I bet you out of 100 kids, 99 of them you could get them to pick up a snake within just a few minutes. To play on that same point about adults versus children, I gave a talk once to let's say it was a group of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and their parents. And I had some live animals, and at the end, I always keep the snakes to the end. But at the end, I had a snake, talked about it, and then said, "So how many of you really like snakes?" And all the kids were raising their hands, some of the adults, but one mother, her daughter was raising her hand, and she put her hand down. The mother pushed the little girl's hand down. In other words, she wanted that's where people get their fear of snakes from, people who are afraid of them themselves.
Yeah, it's certainly a learned fear.
Yes, it certainly is. And a lot of people, even adults, can get over it sometimes. With the other groups, they're different. I think the two extremes may be the salamanders, which most people are not familiar with. But Parker, wouldn't you say it's true, like out at our property where it's called Sallyland, where we take groups several times a year, we have a lot of salamanders, and I don't think I've ever found anybody that wasn't just fascinated with the three-line salamander. They're black and yellow stripes, beautiful, and people, they're just, from adults, children, everybody seems to like salamanders because they hadn't been taught anything about them, and they haven't been taught to fear them, and there's nothing to fear about them either.
Discover the magic of nature with Sallyland, Wildlife Adventures in Swamps, Sandhills, and Forests, the award-winning book by renowned naturalist Whit Gibbons. After retiring from academia, Whit Gibbons and his family transformed an abandoned patch of farmland into a vibrant outdoor classroom. Filled with colorful stories and expert advice, Sallyland invites you to explore your surroundings with curiosity and wonder. Learn how to embrace nature, from keeping field journals to using modern wildlife cameras. Join Whit Gibbons on a journey that celebrates the beauty of the natural world and inspires you to discover the secrets in your own backyard. Grab your copy today and let the adventure begin. Links to order this and other of Whit's books are on his website, whitgibbons.com.
Well, and so talking about snakes, do I understand correctly? Again, we're going to stay here within the Southeast, but you could even talk about the rest of the U.S. too, that the majority of snakes that you would just find in your backyard or something are harmless. Is that a true statement
Oh,
generally?
yeah. Yeah, there's how many snakes in South Carolina? About 38, something like that, species, maybe.
It's venomous.
6 of them are venomous. We got 3 rattlesnakes and a copperhead, cottonmouth, and a coral snake. And they can be dangerous, but most of the people that get bitten by them pick them up. People that shouldn't be picking them up, including herpetologists sometimes.
I'm going to
But
come back to that in a second. But so if the majority are not harmful, is there something that people could look for, kind of an easy sign of, oh, this is a harmless snake? And I know it might not be 100%, but kind of some generalizations.
So no.
that's the answer.
There's no good rule
There
for
is
Okay.
no.
being able
no
to tell
one.
if a snake is venomous or not. The best thing to do is to learn the species of venomous snake that are in your area and figure out the identifying features for those species. And then once you know those ones, you know the rest are harmless.
Yeah, there are things you've heard over time, like venomous snakes have elliptical pupils, cat eyes, and that's true for the pit vipers, but the coral snake has around here has round pupils, so that doesn't work.
Yeah, and all rules like to have exceptions. Like I have seen a copperhead with a round pupil before.
We've also know of a coral snake with no red, for instance. Our advice to people that are not really familiar with the snakes, enjoy them from 6 feet away, and you're okay. But don't pick them up. As I said, a high percentage of snake bites in the country a lot of them are from people picking a snake up when they shouldn't be doing it because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I like the 6-foot rule because I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I don't know that, like, you're not gonna be like, hey, snake, can you stay right there so I can see your pupils? And then
Yeah,
let me get close enough to check them out. Like, that seems kind of silly.
yeah. Well, if you're close enough to see their pupils, you're too close anyway. If you're not familiar with what you're doing. Parker made a good point. We focus on reptiles and amphibians. That's the passion, but the passion extends out to a lot of other things. Parker, on his tours, he was just saying you deal everything from marine mammals to some of the, like, glass lizards. Tell them about glass lizards. That's a fascinating group of animals. And I have a story that I will tell about attitudes. Go ahead.
Glass lizards, yeah, there's 4 species of glass lizards in South Carolina. The eastern glass lizard, slender glass lizard, and then island and mimic glass lizards, and those 2 are pretty rare. But these are fully legless lizards. They look just like snakes. They have eyelids. Snakes don't have eyelids. Glass lizards have ear openings. Snakes don't. And then glass lizards can break off their tail and regrow it. Another trait that snakes cannot do.
And a glass lizard is a great example of a phenomenon I saw once. I gave a talk to a Rotary Club group, actually in Tuscaloosa. I happened to be there, and I was getting out the snakes at the end of a talk. I had live animals getting out, but the first one I got out was a glass lizard, and it happened to be a woman sitting in the front row. She saw it, ran to the back of the room, and she said, "I can't stand snakes." And I was able to say honestly, "Well, this isn't a snake. This is a lizard." She came up and I had her hold it, and they look just like a snake. I mean, in fact, we get calls every year, don't we, Parker, from people around here, because they're pretty common on the coast, particularly. Glass lizards are. People think they have a snake and they can't find it in a snake book. So they can't identify it. But this woman, because I called it something else, it was okay. But she couldn't tell it from a snake. And yet, I thought that was a rather unusual behavior. But that's the way people are. It's irrational behavior.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show you about I think, Parker, you said it's a learned fear. So in that case, and that explains it, right? It's not that you see it and you are fearful because because of what you see it, that's a snake, I should fear that, and now you're afraid. That's really fascinating concept.
Yeah.
I say that I'm more startled than scared of snakes, but that's true of, even a squirrel. Like, I'm easily startled, but then when I see, I'm like, oh, okay, kind of thing. But I definitely don't go and try to pick them up. My conversation with Whit and Parker is so interesting, but we ran out of time, and so this was the end of part 1. But please tune in next week when Parker and Whit will be back to finish our conversation. One of the things that resonated with me from this conversation is that people care more about things they know more about. This is true in so many facets of life and work. When it comes to workplace learning, leadership often forgets the humanness of their workforce. Humans have increased desire to help when they know details like the what, why now, and how. I've mentioned this before, and it's not a difficult concept, but it is one that is often ignored. Learned fear, that was another powerful thought, and it doesn't just relate to snakes and other animals. In the workplace, we have all kinds of fears that have been learned throughout our life, like fear of failure, fear of being perceived one way or another, and those fears can lead to unproductive behaviors. One more thing that came up in this conversation is the idea of sharing your love for something to help others better understand it and gain appreciation for it. Not everyone is going to love snakes, just like not everyone is going to love every workplace training. But sharing the love of learning may spark at least a little appreciation in others. I know that's something that I often strive for in my work, and I hope you do too. Thank you so much to my guests, Whit and Parker, and thank you to today's sponsor, which is the award-winning book Sallyland: Wildlife Adventures in Swamps, Sandhills, and Forests, written by renowned naturalist and one of today's guests, Whit Gibbons. You can find it along with all the other interesting books on reptiles, amphibians, and more on his website, whitgibbons.com. I know what a nature lover or two on my Christmas list will be receiving this year. Go check it out. And thank you for listening. I hope you'll tune in next week for the second half of my conversation with Whit and Parker. You've been listening to One More Thing, a radio show on the Power Me Up radio station on iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to you tuning in next time as we continue cultivating your mind with one more thing.